Welcome to Let's Talk Antigonish, the podcast where we sit down with neighbors, experts, and friends to explore the stories, the questions, and the big little issues that shape life in our town, one conversation at a time. This week, we're speaking with our Member of Parliament, Jaime Battiste. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Antigonish. This is your co-host, Justin. My other co-host this week is Brendan Ahern, who's a journalist filling in for Anuj. Anuj is gone for the next month. Strangely, the recording this week, the first few minutes of it were lost. I'm not sure where they went. So in that, I introduced Brendan, and he said hello and a couple charming things. And then we got straight into the interview with our Member of Parliament, Jaime Battiste. So let's start that section where I introduced Jaime. Hello.
How's it going? Good to be here.
It's great to be here. I appreciate you coming in. I know you have a very busy schedule. We just talked about it. But yeah, so we're going to ask a bunch of questions of our MP. What fun. But we're going to start with the fact that your name is Jaime, which looks like Jamie on paper. So what's going on there? Because you are from Eskasoni.
I blame my parents entirely for my first name. I take no responsibility in this. I didn't change this, but I am named after a friend my father went to law school with at Harvard. His name was Jaime Cervantes, and he was one of my father's best friends. And so I got a Spanish name, a Chicano name, in Cape Breton, which, you know what, if someone calls me Jamie, I generally don't correct them.
Okay.
If they want to vote for Jaime Battiste, they can, or they can vote for Jaime Battiste. But that's how my staff kind of realizes whether people really know me or not.
Right.
When they come to the office and say, "Hey, we know Jamie," and they're like, "Oh, do you now?
Do you now?" Yeah, exactly.
And so it's like a first test now to get through. But if I'm ordering a pizza or a taxi cab, I'll just go with the hey, yes, Jamie's ordering a taxi or a pizza, because saying my name Jaime usually results in what? Heiny, tiny, everything else.
Yeah.
And then it's a long conversation. And unless I need to know you, then I'll say Jamie if
just to make it easier, grease the wheels.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So Jaime, a Spanish name, but you are from Eskasoni.
I am.
And your parents, I believe, both of whom I believe are attorneys. Is that correct?
No, they're academics.
Both are academics.
And so, long story short, with my parents, they met at Harvard. My mom was a Mi'kmaq going to do her Master's of Education. My father was a law student finishing off his law degree. My mother was looking for a tutor in a course called Education Law. Mm-hmm. And so she went to, I guess, the Native American place in Harvard, and they referred her to my father, and they must have been great lessons, because 6 years later, I was born.
That's very good, yeah.
And so my mom, being Mi'kmaq, she was asked a couple times by some of the leaders to help revitalize the Mi'kmaq education system, the Mi'kmaq language, help with the things because she was the first ever Mi'kmaq PhD. And so her and my father moved to Cape Breton, and they spent a number of years working there before eventually going out to University of Saskatchewan for 30 years to be in the academic field out here, but now they're retired and living in Cape Breton.
In Cape Breton. And your mother was, if I'm remembering correctly, kind of instrumental in revitalizing Mi'kmaq language.
Well, Mi'kmaq education for sure.
Okay.
She was the first ever PhD, and she did her PhD on bicultural bilingual education, is teaching Indigenous language students and trying to figure out how to ensure that they were capturing the language, but were capturing the education system, and really basically decolonizing education. And that's one of her books of many that talks about the journey she's had from decolonizing educations. And, Mi'kmaq right now have the highest graduation rates across Canada. We took over our own education system way back in the 90s, and we went from maybe 60% graduation rates to 95% graduation rates. And so
wow, that's very impressive.
Yeah. And you know what? Across the country, when I was looking at some of the statistics under my file under Crown Indigenous Relations, you will have in places like Saskatchewan and Manitoba, the dropout rate be 2 to 3 times higher than the actual university graduation rate. And in Nova Scotia, our university graduate rates are higher than our dropout rates. And so it's such a contrast when you go all across the country in terms of what's out there. And I always tell Indigenous communities from across the nation, it starts with taking over your education system to have economic success, educational success, and in some situations, political success.
Sure. Speaking of political success, you are our MP. Before that, I think you received a law degree. Were you a practicing attorney?
No, actually, I came out of law school and went into academia.
Oh.
I applied at being 24 years old, never thinking that they would hire someone straight out of law school to be an academic. And, I must have done well on the interviews. And of course, my family background was academia. So it was something that I just kind of walked into right away and became an academic in some cases, being younger than my actual students.
That's hilarious. What was your area?
Well, political science, but they have Mi'kmaq studies and history. So they're kind of cross-referenced from political science, history, and Mi'kmaq studies, which I think it's now called Indigenous Studies at Cape Breton University.
Okay. And so then you became an MP. What is the journey from academic to deciding that you want to get into politics at this level? Like, were there steps along the way kind of thing?
Well, I think being successful at a young age really had a play in it. And I was doing a lot of different volunteering, a lot of leadership work with youth council. I was in 2004. I was the Assembly of First Nations National Youth Chair for First Nations across Canada, and got to go to amazing things like the Kelowna Accord, which was the first ministers meeting with the premiers and Indigenous communities across Canada. And as part of that, you meet a lot of people who were very influential. During that time, I met Paul Martin, became kind of good friends with him after that. He was the prime minister, and had that kind of relationship. And I'll honestly say that Paul Martin made me a liberal. I grew up, in families that voted liberal, but Paul Martin was the really one who encouraged me to be a part of it. And once I never thought that this was the trajectory. I was very happy being the treaty education lead for Nova Scotia with the Mi'kmaq communities, but my predecessor, Mark Eiking, retired after 19 years, and I had a lot of people encouraging me to take on the see if I could be the first member of parliament ever who was Mi'kmaq descent.
So that was your first attempt. You didn't, not an MLA, not like local. You went municipal. You went straight to MP. That's a big. Did you have to leave your job and then run the campaign? That's a big risk. But you were obviously it worked out. So we figured that out. But did that freak you out in that moment? You're like, oh no, what am I doing?
I never went into it thinking that I was going to win. I went into every step thinking that, I want to show that the Mi'kmaq will show up and be a part of the federal political system. Our turnout rates in voter elections aren't always that great. But when I talked to the initial leaders and the Mi'kmaq chiefs at the time, who I worked for, they were very supportive. But they had seen me grow up from First Nations youth politics to regional chief, to now, these leadership roles around treaty education. And so when they basically gave me time off to pursue this and say, hey, you've got a great chance at this, give it a go. And each step of the way, I put in the work, but each step of the way, I was surprised when I won.
Yeah, that's great. And did you have a lot of support from the Mi'kmaq community then?
Absolutely.
Okay, that must help a lot.
Yeah. I mean, the community of Eskasoni, in this riding now that's Cape Breton, Canso, Antigonish. Antigonish is the biggest population, I think about 5,000, more than 5,000. Eskasoni's just under 5,000 at this point. And so it's the second biggest population in the riding. And, when I was doing the nomination, and the nomination is basically you were signing people up for the Liberal Party, the number that I had in my head was about, 1,000 people would generally show up to a nomination meeting. I signed up 800, and I'd say a lot of them, 90% were Mi'kmaq.
Right. And do you have a lot of contact with Bakunkek here locally? Are you?
Actually, I'm related to a lot of the members of Bakunkek because the Julian family and my great grandfather was the one who actually established Bakunkek, and so the current chief, Juliana, she's my cousin. Half of the Julian family in Bakunkek, if not 75 to 80% of them, are all my cousins.
Okay,
and so the whole, I'd say I'm related to 25 to 30% of Bakunkek.
So you got support there, just based on immediate bloodline.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Brendan, did you have a question? I keep talking.
I mean, this is so what does an MP do? What is
I'll say it's a tale of two worlds, right?
Okay.
Because in Ottawa, you get to Ottawa and you're there 26 of the weeks of the year minimum. And your schedule is Monday to Thursday, unless you're a parliamentary secretary, which I am, which means that you're basically a parliamentary secretary is a vice principal to the minister. So if the minister's not there, you have to be there. And the minister generally doesn't want to be there on a Friday. They tour the country, they do things. And so they ask the parliamentary secretaries. So I'm there Monday to Friday for 26 weeks of the year. And it's like 8 a.m. to 8 p.m.
Okay.
It's committees, it's caucus meetings, it's taking meetings with some of the stakeholders that come to Ottawa that are advocating for something, whether it's nurses, whether it's firemen, whether it's environmentalists. You know, they all generally have these days called Days on the Hill of advocacy, in which they're recommending things for the government to follow up on, whether in budgets or in policy. And then during 1 hour of each day, they have this thing called question period, where in Canada, the Prime Minister and the people who make the decisions are held accountable by the opposition party by asking questions about what we're deciding on, what we're doing. And so you're held accountable. And then, of course, the voting, debating, legislation. And then in the evening, every one of these advocacy groups that come to Ottawa have receptions that they want you to show up at. And so I tell everyone it's an 8 a.m. till 8 p.m. job in Ottawa. You wake up 8 a.m. and if I get home in time to watch the National that night, then that's how it is. And it's but then you get to come home. And then in the coming home is you have office hours, but I have a riding that's twice the size of PEI.
Yeah,
for
75,000 people.
For one MP. I mean, the people is about generally the same in all areas, but I'd say not too many MPs have to wake up every day and drive 2 hours to their meetings.
You have 13,000 square kilometers to go over, whereas the same number of people live in Sydney, just Sydney. Yeah. So you could walk that. So how does that play into your life then as in charge of this riding? Like, what is different about it? Because you're saying you have to travel a lot, but how does that affect you either positively or negatively?
I think it's a lot more time on the road. And one of the things I realized last summer is how blessed we are to be in this riding. Like, if you're in Cape Breton, Canso, Antigonish, you're on a river, you're on a lake, you're oceanside. So many times last year I said, I wish I was a photographer, because you run into these great, sunsets. You see these amazing things around the Bredor Lakes. You see, amazing things as you're going into Antigonish. Even just driving back from Antigonish to Cape Breton usually is a beautiful drive. And so it's a lot of time on the road. I wish we had better cell service. I'm working on it. It's one of the number one things that I talk to people about when I'm in Ottawa and trying to improve the cell service in the riding. But in terms of the time on the road, it's just a lot of time listening to music, a lot of time listening to podcasts, a lot of time listening to, I wish I could take more calls on the road, but the service isn't that reliable. Okay. So it's a lot. I know I'm going a lot, but you asked a long question about being an MP, and a lot of it's when you're home is just meeting with people who want to talk to you about what they feel important.
And then you take those things back to the Ottawa cycle of your yearly workflow, right? So then you go back, you enter those committees again, you do question period. I guess you mentioned the cell towers, like as an example, trying to improve cellular communication. One question I had was where does your role intersect with our municipal and provincial representatives? So with cell service, that's municipal, that's provincial. What are some of the things that when you're going to Ottawa and you're working on these things that we're going to start seeing, or we can start seeing around here?
Well, a lot of it's around housing. I know that one of the biggest things that the municipality has talked to me about is ensuring that we have another road for the hospital. That's something I've prioritized, because we all saw the traffic last December in this area and how ridiculous it can be if we shut down one road. Yeah. And it's just, me and Dion came in for meetings, and it was about a 15-minute wait before we turned around and said, okay, let's do this by phone. Yeah. And so, this is the things that we're looking at.
So I have a question on that, because I'm familiar with the U.S. system where you have senators and congressmen that have the pork barrel issue of when you're in one of those houses, you can tag things onto a bill to bring money back to you wherever you are from, whatever state you are from. But I feel like the Canadian system doesn't work that way. It may be a little harder for an MP to be like, Antigonish needs something, and then Jaime, I'm going to go and I'm going to bother people until I get money for it. What is that process actually like when you're advocating for your local district?
Well, generally do government budget consultations in August in preparation for a budget that gets tabled in November. And so throughout August, we meet as not just the Atlantic Caucus, Indigenous Caucus, you'll have a Rural Caucus, and we start identifying priorities that we want to see in the budget. And you are correct that it's very rare that you get something for your riding in the budget by name, unless you really advocate for it and unless you're really successful at doing, which I was in the last budget. We have in the budget, it says bedecked rink.
Okay.
And so, it didn't have a line item attached to it, but we said we were going to have this Build Canada Strong Fund. And as part of that, we said we realized that there was a county in Canada that didn't have a working rink. I think it was one of the only counties in all of Canada that didn't have a operational rink. And so when we took this to the Minister of Finance and the budget consultations that happened in Cape Breton, we were able to be successful in getting the bedecked rink directly in the budget, and I was able to announce, I think a few weeks after that, what the number was. I think it was like $12 million.
Great.
And it was one of the bigger ones, but you're accurate. Like
Yeah.
it's not every MP that gets something in the budget that's directly attributed to your advocacy, but
Yeah.
we were lucky in
So
terms of that one.
Like the caucus is coming together to discuss things, and everyone is in there with their ideas, but it's not a direct, like, except for the rink, perhaps, there's not as many wins you can say, like, oh, this guy's a very good advocate, he's got so much money back home, whereas this one is not as good. It sounds like it's more collaborative than the U.S. system, I would say.
Much more collaborative. You're lucky if you get one of these standalone projects, but we do have caucus chairs. Like the Atlantic has a caucus chair. I've been chair of the Indigenous Caucus for the past 7 years. I draft a letter to the Minister of Finance based on what I hear from the members of the Indigenous members of caucus that say, here are your priorities. We'll probably give the Minister of Finance 3 pages, and he'll be like, which are the 3 that you can't live without? And these are how the conversations happen. And, I'd say in terms of advocacy, when caucuses put forward letters and prioritize 3 or 5 things, I'd say they're about 80% successful in getting things. Sometimes you have to be patient and wait for the following year for some things, but I'd say if the advocacy stays pretty consistent, and with the Rural Caucus, we're always pushing for connectivity, and so these are the things that how it happens in terms of the budget.
So how does because there's 11 MPs from Nova Scotia, is that right?
Yes.
So how are you interacting with the provincial government when they want something at a provincial level? Like, do they come? You're getting phone calls from Tim Houston complaining that we need this and that, and do you have it? Like, how does that contact work?
It's easier for governments to work together. I'd say my communications are more from the local MLAs than they are from. Well, I don't get phone calls from Premier Houston. Well, I'll just throw it out there, like
from Michelle, maybe.
But Michelle for sure, and we have a good relationship. And I think that when you're able to represent the same people and they represent the same needs, it's a lot easier than having different factions of government. But the Nova Scotia caucus, which is now all 11 of them are Liberal MPs, and so we have chat groups, and we basically keep up to date with what's going on, if not daily, for sure every other day, kind of checking in on each other. And are you hearing this about this? Are you hearing problems about that? What are you guys hearing about this group? And so we chat quite a bit, and so that's how we do it through the summer, and then we meet at least once a month. We'll have a minister come in, whether it's the Prime Minister, who had a big announcement in Halifax last week that's really going to benefit this riding around the maritime space port, and more than $200 million invested in this maritime spaceport, and we're just on the cusp of all kinds of growth and defensive spending and things that are going to really benefit not just the area of Canso, but Guysborough and Port Hawkesbury and Antigonish, because there's not enough accommodations to be hosting all of the folks that are going to be coming into this area.
Well, so there are 11 of you, and you head to Ottawa, and you're in the ruling party. That must feel like you have some power to do things, but you're also dealing with like 110 plus people from Ontario. So tell me about this tension of, I'm from just little Nova Scotia, there's only 11 of us, and if you've got a bunch of people from Ontario, 100 plus, advocating for something that has nothing to do with Nova Scotia, how do you make your voice heard representing a rural province with small numbers of MPs? Is that a tension there?
I don't know if it's tension. I think that we've been very good at the Atlantic Caucus of being very focused on our asks, whereas if you have 80 different MPs that represent rural, urban, all of the different areas within Ontario, there's going to be a kind of a different. It's going to be hard to get all of those priorities in place. But when you're in like Nova Scotia, you can say, okay, well, here are the top 3 things that we think we need, and I think that we've been really good at advocating for that. And I think that you also get the chance, and every member of parliament, we have caucus every Wednesday when we're sitting. You have the chance to get up in front of all 170 of your fellow MPs and give interventions and talk about things. And because I've been the chair there of Indigenous Caucus for 7 years, I do 3 minutes every single caucus meeting, but also there are times when I'll get up just talking about the needs of the riding or ideas around things like healthcare, ideas around things around the environment, sports. And so, I'd say that I've been able to be one of the most vocal MPs that we have in our caucus just because of my longevity as chair of the Indigenous Caucus.
How many people are in the Indigenous Caucus?
7 now.
Okay. Yeah, and so you get a bit of time, and that means you can talk about anything essentially when you get up there.
We talk about the meeting that we had on. So we have a meeting on Monday. We talk about the priorities. We invite ministers to come talk with us, and then from that we have general discussion, and then I have 3 minutes to capture all of the discussions and make some asks to the Prime Minister and Cabinet. And it's just generally just having a conversation with the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, here's what we think, and give them our feedback. And we don't say what we talk about in caucus outside of caucus, but it's in general, you have the ability as an MP every week to get up and talk to the caucus about what are some of your priorities. And I think that the people who are successful talk about things that resonate with everyone. Because if I just go in and just talk about one area,
a skating
and
rink
one
in Bedeck,
project, then you're generally not going to get too much support from folks.
Yeah.
But if you say, what we really need to do is to fund recreation for playgrounds, for sports, the impact of the quality of life when people have playgrounds, when they have sport, when they have walking tracks, when they have active living stuff, it's better for their health, it's better for everyone, and then we find a way to fund that. And so
it sounds like you have to kind of walk a bit of not walk a fine line, but you hear all this input from your constituency, and then you can't just say like, this specific place needs this. You might need to. It sounds like part of your job is like selling it back.
Yeah, it's very much broad. You have to take the broad picture and say, what is it that I'm going to be pitching that everyone out of the 170 MPs here is going to agree with, as opposed to just saying that I need a new wharf in Arashat or something like that. It'd say, what we really need is small craft harbor funding. And so that means all the Atlantic and potentially British Columbia and even the Ontario places that are around lakes are going to be like, I have a wharf that needs fixing. And so you really have to take the small needs that are in your communities and put it on a larger scale. And we need funding for these big asks that come into the budget that are in the millions, sometimes billions.
And have there been? I know we need to move on to some other stuff, but I am interested. And I think you might have mentioned some things that are like adjacent to it, like you mentioned the spaceport, like that's like near Antigonish County, that's in Guysborough County or Canso.
Canso.
Has anyone from Antigonish, like our municipal representatives, are they reaching out for any projects or like any
always
infrastructure
always.
things?
Always.
Through this?
It never stops. But
Okay.
it's have conversations with the mayors and the councillors and say, okay, what is the top one? And they kind of come into the office and say, here's what we need. And it's a conversation between the municipal and provincial and federal. The reason we got the Bedeck rink in there because we had private donations going in. We had the municipal county going in. We had the provincial government. And so the federal is usually the last piece because we're usually the biggest piece, whereas we, cover anywhere between 40% of the overall scale of a project. So we're usually the last piece of the puzzle, and the municipalities and provincial governments are usually the first ones that say, okay, we'll put in this, this, and this. And then I can go back to the Minister of Finance and say, hey, listen, I have all these levels of government working on things. They're committed to it. We need a federal commitment.
So they need to get those kind of ducks in a row. They don't need to, but ideally those ducks are in a row, and then you can pull the trigger.
That's when it's usually successful on these big $10 million plus kind of things, is that you have to have contributions from other folks. And in terms of the spaceports and the $200 million investments, that's when you have like proponents putting up money and, the private industry also saying, if you put in, if the government helps us out with loans or government helps us out with investments, we're going to put this much money into it. And, we were just very lucky with the spaceport, is that we have a large area next to the ocean that also happens to have a large area of rural areas, because you don't necessarily want to be testing rockets and things like that in urban settings.
Why not? I think so. Right now, you're in the summer portion of your job. You're going around. It sounds like you're traveling all over the place. We did have a question about
that. Yeah. So you have some questions that Anuj has sent through.
Yes.
Brendan. So I'll have you ask those, but I will ask this question, which I think you're going to ask. On Facebook, we had said we're going to be interviewing you, and we're like, what questions do you have? And most of them were like questions about like the Carney government's policies. I'm like, well, we're not going to talk like big global issues. Like I want to keep it small to Antigonish. Yeah. But there was the question that cropped up the most was people who are complaining mostly, because that's what people do. It's Facebook. I am trying to get in touch with Jaime. I've sent an email or a telephone and I haven't heard back. How do we get in touch with you, and or why am I not hearing back? So tell us, because we've got some challenges you've talked about. Is a huge writing geographically, and you're around, your office is a mobile office at this point. So what do you tell people who are having trouble getting in touch with you, and do you have recommendations on the best way to get in touch with you?
First thing I would say is make sure that when you're sending me emails that you put your address, because I get not just emails from the riding,
but like from BC,
from Toronto, from BC. We get so many different emails from people lobbying about things from Ontario, and so I'd say the first thing that you need to do if you want to be successful in getting a email back from my staff and us is to put your address and where you live and say that I am a constituent, because we get so many emails every day.
How many emails do you get, if you had to estimate?
I couldn't even estimate. Hundreds, if not thousands.
Per day?
Okay.
Per day. And then we have
thousands per day. Okay, so this may be part of the problem.
And is that the main way, or are you getting phone calls as well?
Well, we get phone calls as well, but I'd say most of the people today do emails, and to both of my offices.
Yeah. And
you have to realize that a member of parliament, all of our stuff is on websites, right? So you type my name, you find me on, and it's not like I'm giving people my cards for emails. Like everything I have is public.
Anyone can find you.
So it doesn't even have to be people from Canada. It could be United States. It could be India. It could be anywhere. And so we have so many emails that come in. But I always say, if you clarify that you're a constituent and this is where your address is, it's always going to be prioritized over the hundreds of emails I'll get on anything from gun legislation to healthcare to the immigration policy. One of the things that we're doing this year that I'm doing a little bit differently is last year we heard that we have a office space in Antigonish, we have an office space in Cape Breton near Bulladrees, and that was too far for people to travel. So this year I've invested in a 18-foot trailer that has a mobile office in it, bathroom. And so what we've been doing is taking that on the road, and we're testing it out. And we've tested it out this week and started off in Badek, went to Ingonish, went to Bay St. Lawrence, Pleasant Bay, Chetty Camp, Inverness, all the way down to Judic, Port Hawkesbury, and then Guysborough, all of the places along the journey. And just said, like, I'm here. I got
it's got your name. I've seen a picture. It's got your name on it. So wait, are you advocating that people, if they see it drive by, they just chase you down with their car so they can have a meeting?
Well, I just park it, and people come by and talk to me. And
you'd welcome that.
Yeah, I do. And so actually, that's what the whole point is.
Interesting.
I'm doing my emails, and I'm doing all of the things that I would be doing in my Antigonish or Cape Breton office, but I'm doing it in their areas. And so I'm just there checking my emails and usually trying to find somewhere that has good service and stop there, but checking the emails, doing the calls, replying to staff about, various things. But also if someone wants to just stop by and say, hey, I see you here. And we've had that in Badek and Ingonish, people just stopping in and saying hello. And then, there's all kinds of fun stuff to do along the journey as well. We were in Antigonish Beach. We started in the morning, and we ended up playing pickleball with a bunch of seniors out there for the first time, and ended our day at men's night in Shetty Camp playing golf. So it was like, there's all kinds of fun things you do on the journey, and it's such a beautiful place to be traveling to. So when I was sitting in Ottawa in May, thinking about how this summer was going to go, I was like dreaming about the Cabot Trail and all of the beautiful scenery there. And like, if I had a mobile office that I could just keep moving along this area, it's been great, but it's almost felt like it's campaign time because I'm in so many different stops along the journey. But
so I think we got an answer, I suppose, which is that, first of all, you get a ton of emails and phone calls a day. So if you want to be heard in that, you have to be clear about the fact you are a constituent.
Put it in your subject line.
And number two, you have a unique situation in that you're dealing with 13,000 square kilometers, unlike someone in Sydney. So you can't just someone can't just pop by your office because you could be anywhere on the road. Yes. And that is different from other locales, from other ridings, perhaps.
Yeah, you have a lot of ground to cover.
So it's the largest in the Atlantic Canada.
It's the largest in Atlantic Canada. Okay,
so to give it, Labrador is pretty big too, but put it into context, PEI is probably half the size of my riding, and they have 4 MPs.
Yes.
Where it's just me going around. And so
Interesting.
For those out there that are wondering, when am I getting an email or a phone call back? Like there's a lot of folks and there's a lot of ground to cover, but we do our best in the staff to figure out what is priority, what are the things that we can help in. And sometimes things pop up in our emails that aren't us. It's provincial jurisdiction. Like we get a lot of complaints about roads and potholes.
I'm sure that's the number one complaint in the municipality.
That's not
your jurisdiction.
Nothing to do with us. And so,
all right. Well, I think that will probably, they will never satisfy everyone. No one is ever completely satisfied. That's life. But I think it answers that question pretty well. Brendan, do you have Anuj questions?
I do. So we have a lot of newcomers coming into Antigonish from inside Canada and from outside Canada. Like the town and the county are getting more and more diverse. So, what role is the federal government doing, or what are the federal supports available for newcomers to town, with health, housing, jobs, et cetera, et cetera? We've got, Well,
I think it's multifaceted. One of the things that I think that we've realized over the past 5 years, especially, is that we needed to ensure that when we do bring people in, that there are the supports and that for healthcare, for housing, for a lot of the different, for jobs. And so in a lot of ways, we've started looking at immigration in a position of, okay, we want to bring immigrants in. We want to ensure immigration numbers are healthy. They add to our society. They bring jobs. They bring skills that we don't always have. But we also have to make sure that we don't bring in too many people and that we have strain on some of the resources. And I think that over the past year, the Prime Minister has said, we're going to do our best to ensure that we have the supports in place to handle the targets we're creating. And that's something that we're really looking at nowadays. In terms of supports, when we bring people in, it's not only a federal responsibility, provincial responsibility. We also have, some great volunteer organizations helping people. And I know that Antigonish is probably seen as the model for welcoming people in, and Peace by Chocolate has a movie named after it. I've seen the movie before I was even the MP of this area, and Tarek Haddad is. Am I saying it correctly?
Yep, Tarek Haddad. Yeah,
Haddad is one of the examples that your previous MP Sean Fraser was showing, and it's like how immigrants can come in and really succeed and thrive. And now they've got shops at the airport. And every time we bring people forward, like I brought the Minister of Immigration in to meet with some local stakeholders about, jobs, about what's going on. But we also took her to Peace by Chocolate on Main Street and, had her stop in. But
I think especially, I'm sorry.
No, it's a large question, and it's not just one government that is doing it. What we're doing as a federal government is we bring in the people, and we have the ability, to set those targets. But then when we get people here, it's also about how do we work collectively throughout governments to make sure that when we bring people here, that there's the supports.
Yeah, I think especially in a university town, like I think there's a lot of international students who are coming in, and they are struggling to find work in their like respective technical areas, which is usually a prerequisite to get what is it, PR,
Permanent residency.
Yeah. So like, how should those students who are maybe struggling to find like work in their specialized area, how should they be like approaching like these different levels, especially like given like changing federal policy on that, like in the last 5-6 years?
Ooh, that's a good initial question.
That's a loaded question,
Yeah.
and I can only say that with our federal levels, because we're looking at it from the levels of how do we bring people in and how do we ensure that they're supported when they're actually here in terms of what our supports are. A lot of times that's different levels of government and figuring out local. It's more of a local thing than something that the member of parliament does to deal with.
And like you say, like we had like Safe Harbor, like that was a completely
local. Yeah, this is something we talk about, Anuj and I, when we interview like the mayor and our MLA, is like we asked the municipality, like, what are you doing for housing because we may have a housing problem? And the idea is, well, the municipality can't really do that much. They can put the infrastructure in place, but it's up to the private sector to sort of deal with housing. And so you kick that up to the province and then to the MP. And I feel like you have no real control over what's being built in Antigonish in terms of homes, right? Like there's no legislative control or advocacy control from your personal perspective about what kinds of homes are built.
We support they come to us when they've got the funding or need funding, but we don't control that.
It's a different level of government.
International students, we rely heavily on the university to set levels that are reasonable. If they know that they're going to bring in 5,000 people, that we expect them to have a place for them. And that hasn't always been the case, and we've had to in the past, work with universities and say, you need to decrease your levels because you're bringing in more folks than you have housing and space for, and that's something that's conversations that are ongoing. It's
so there's some levers there, but when it comes to funding to encourage organizations like a university, but other than that, there's not a lot that you can do. I imagine from the federal level. Did you have? There was another question Anuj had on this as well, right? Something to do with the big federal funding initiative.
Oh yeah, the Build Canada. We did kind of talk about Build Canada, and I did ask like, obviously, like infrastructure renewal or new infrastructure in the town. Like it sounds like you are getting a lot of requests.
Oh, yeah.
Like right. So your role would be to again, hopefully everyone gets their ducks in a row.
Yeah.
And then you can like pull from that. Is it like a $13 billion? Yeah. The Build Canada Fund.
Yeah, I mean, it's $51 billion over 10 years. And so what we've been able to do, there's three levels that really I can stress. One of them I talked about earlier when we're looking at the Build Canada Strong Infrastructure Fund, where we were able to get the rink funding for the Victoria County in the city of Bedeque, and that was a $12 million infrastructure, one of the examples of that in the budget. But we also have a provincial and territorial stream, and we provide the provincial government about $343 million. I think we asked them to put $170 million towards health infrastructure because we're hearing from the premiers that this is something that is a challenge, and health is provincial jurisdiction, but they sometimes need some help from the federal government, and so we help them. Builds hospitals, build roads to the hospitals, builds health care expansion, the things that they need that we know that are going to go through the community. And so that's the provincial territorial stream. And then we have kind of a local impact stream of community infrastructure that are for the smaller ones, where we'll match groups, let's say groups fundraising for a Legion, for a heat pump, or to fix the playground, or to put a beach volleyball thing in, or and we'll say, if you guys do 20,000, we'll do 20,000. If you guys do 40,000, we'll do 40,000. It's usually around $50,000, kind of the small infrastructure. But these are all the levels. When we're looking at the Build Canada infrastructure, we're looking at the big picture projects like hospitals, roads, sewage, but also
those little projects,
also the health improvements that we need, and the smaller ones, because all of these help the quality of life of Canada, and we really try to target how we don't just look at the big stuff, but we also try to figure out how we can help the small community groups as well.
I think we're
close. We're getting there, but I got some more fun questions before we wrap it up. So What initiatives are you currently involved with that you are the most excited about?
What initiatives that I'm the most excited
Or ideas that you have for initiatives?
I'll tell you one that I got a little bit of credit for. One of the things that I was door knocking, and I ran into, everyone was talking about the long waits at at the hospitals and the lack of, being able to find family doctors. I knocked on a door, and the person was a physician assistant. And I said, "What's a physician assistant?" It was like, "Well, we help doctors, and we can have the same role." But it started out in like the World War II, where we didn't have enough doctors to be on the field, so we had to do crash courses in medical so that we could support the war efforts. Anyway, fast forward to where we're at today. In the United States, there are 263 different universities that graduate physician's assistants. They take 1/3 of the time and they cost 1/3 of the amount, but they are ensuring that the emergency rooms, you could either have 2 doctors or you could have 1 doctor and 3 physician's assistants. So you have 4 people seeing people. And when you show up to a hospital in pain, all you want is someone to examine you, tell you what's going on, and help you.
You're not looking at the letters behind
Yeah,
their
you're not
name.
looking at the letters. You just want to be seen. And so one of the things I'd really started pushing and to have more physician's assistant programs in Canada. We're just started one, I think, now in Dalhousie. That was one of the ones I really pushed for in terms of meeting with the president of Dalhousie, talking to the prime minister, doing interventions in caucus about what this was about. And I was lucky enough to be awarded by the Canadian Association of Physicians Assistants an advocacy award by the national group. I think it was 3 years ago, and we now have a physician's assistant program in Dalhousie, and it's the only one in Atlantic, Canada. And I give people the stat: in the United States, there's more than 260 universities granting physician's assistant programs. In Canada, we have less than 5.
Yeah.
Wow.
We'll be talking to ER doctors right after you leave, in fact, and then a family doctor next week, and we're going to be talking about physician assistants. I didn't realize your role in that, so that's going to be very interesting. Great. I have another fun question for you. If you could change one thing about federal policy, whatever that means to you, that would have the most impact to improve lives here in Antigonish, what would that one thing be?
Okay.
That's a big, fun, loaded, exciting question.
That's a tough one, but I've been an MP now for 7 years. And so I'll say one thing that I've been working on, and I think that we're very close on, is within the Indian Act, there is a rule that after 2 generations of, if you don't marry or have kids within the Indian Act, that you lose your status. And it's called the second generation cutoff rule. And we've been hearing a lot about this. It's something that I've been doing advocacy on for 4 years. And we just recently had the Minister of Indigenous Service Canada say that we're going to be the government that introduces legislation to get rid of that. And I think that's going to be, it's discrimination within the Indian Act. It's something that we needed to figure out how to get rid of, and we need to put that back in the hands of the Indigenous communities themselves, instead of a federal government kind of overseeing it and determining who is and who isn't a status Indian in a community. This is something that the communities themselves will be able to take on if we're successful at that legislation. And it's something that I've been pushing for 4 years, and we're just on the cusp of the legislation being co-developed and introduced in the fall.
Cool. And I've got one fun final question.
Yeah, I think it ties in nicely with that.
Yeah, it ties in perfectly. So you threw your hat in the ring in January for party leadership. Yeah. So it is not an impossible situation to think that one day you could be Prime Minister, at which point you would be the first ever Indigenous Prime Minister of Canada. What do you think would change about Canada as a country if you, an Indigenous person, were the Prime Minister?
What do you think? I think there would be a lot more. I mean, wouldn't it say it'd be an amazing thing to have a First Nations prime minister? Like, I look at what the job that Wab Canoe's doing in Manitoba. I've known Wab. He's come to Eskasoni before. The chief of Eskasoni is friends with him. I've known Wab for about 20 years, and we've been friends before both of our political journeys. And so, I text him from time to time. He texts me. But I think he's doing just a tremendous job. And what I see from Wab that I'd love to, that I see the same values in myself as empathy, the ability to have a connection with our environment as a responsibility is something that's entrenched within First Nations values. But I think that just also the strength in terms of the way he stands up to Trump on a daily basis, and sometimes other premiers when they say things that he feels is inaccurate. And I think that we will have a First Nations Prime Minister someday. I would. If I was a betting man, I'd bet on Wab Kinew as opposed to me. As humble as I am, I think that he's one of the most popular premiers. Well, he is the most popular premier in Canada right now. And I think that the values he grew up with are some of the values that I've grown up with. But I think that he's got that notoriety. And I talked to Wab before I ran for the party leadership and thought about what got his thoughts around it, and what should be the things that we're looking at, as well as I went to law school with Premier David Eby. We're friends, and so I was talking to him about it, and it was more of I felt at the time not as much. I knew that it was probably going to be Chrystia Freeland or Mark Carney to be our next prime minister, but I really thought that we needed an Atlantic voice and an Indigenous voice to say, all of your guys' focus is in this area right over here, and you're not focusing on the Atlantic, you're not speaking to us, you're not focusing on Indigenous, you're not speaking to us. And before I stepped out of the race, I really needed to hear from one of the leaders that they would take that into consideration. And I think I had about 3 hours of conversations with Mark Carney before I gave him my endorsement. Okay. And then I realized, so much of this next 2 to 4 years was going to be how you handle Trump and how you handle the international economic situation. And I think that if you had to pick a resume, not politically, but if you just had to pick a resume of the person you wanted dealing with this, I think Mark Carney would be very, very high on just about every Canadian's thing. And so it was it was a discussion that we had, but I think it was the right choice at that time. And I look at everything that's going on in the world, the Prime Minister's Davos speech, everything that we have to deal with in terms of Trump, and say, you know what, I made the right call in stepping out of that race, but I don't regret for a minute being in it for as long as I was. And so, when I come on podcasts and then things like that, these are good conversations. Imagine, the day after you decide you're going to run for Liberal leadership, you're on every single Power Play, Power in Politics, Global, APTN. Everyone wanted to have a minute of your time, and many of them wanted the gotcha moments to say, well, why do you think you should be there? Because look at this, or look what you did here. And, it's always an interesting thing that now I know that no matter what, I can handle the hot seat in whatever I go for.
You might be back in it, I'm afraid. You are very young in politics still. And I love the story of you just went straight from academia to, I'm just going to be an MP. And it worked. So why not? I'm an MP. I'm going to go straight to Prime Minister. It could happen. But anyway, we've kept you long enough, I think. So I really appreciate you coming in, and perhaps we'll have you back on the podcast as the Right Honorable Prime Minister of Nova Scotia.
Good conversation. Longer than more usual interviews, but very rewarding and very fun. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. Yeah. Bye-bye.
All right.
Thank you for listening to Let's Talk Antigonish. If you like the podcast, don't hesitate to subscribe. Just go to letstalkantigonish.ca and click. Voila! You'll receive new episodes right in your email inbox.
This podcast is a labor of love. Please consider making a contribution, small or large, maybe a monthly subscription.
A thank you to all of our supporters and subscribers, especially our paid subscribers through the Substack. You are really helping us to keep this podcast going, and we look forward to expanding it in the future. Let's talk Antigonish. A huge thank you to Whidden Park Campground, one of the sponsors of Let's Talk Antigonish.